Andrew Urquhart with you on the program today. Now, for some of us, for some people, tax cuts this week. The government described them as the squeezed middle. The promised tax cuts are kicked in this week. Not sure if you've noticed. Not sure if you've come up with a list of extra things that you're going to spend the extra money on. More vegetables, perhaps. Yeah, you almost need a mortgage for them at the moment. But talk to us about the tax cuts and the impact that they're likely to have, not just on the squeezed middle, but on those most financially disadvantaged in our society. Ana Ika from the Salvation Army Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit. Talofa, kia ora.
Well, Andrew, thanks for having me.
Now, tax cuts, something promised by the government. This is something that they had to deliver. In order to deliver those tax cuts, there were quite a few other cuts that happened in this year's budget, but they have delivered on what they promised, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite dangerous when not dangerous, but there's a lot of shoulda, woulda, couldas,
Yeah.
You should have done that, you could have done that. But the reality is when they started campaigning, they campaigned on tax relief. And we got to give it to the government. They delivered on what they had promised,
Yep.
even though there's lots of you should have kept a lot of civil servant jobs, you should have kept free transport, there should have been great investment in welfare. But the reality is they didn't campaign on those things. They
Yep.
campaigned on being able to provide tax relief for New Zealanders, for a majority of New Zealanders.
Yep.
And that's what they delivered on. And I hope those that do get it notice a difference in their bank accounts starting from yesterday.
Yeah. Now, for most people, for those that do receive it, it will just be a small increment. But having said that, this seems like the bleakest of winters for a range of people. Do you think it will make a tangible difference? Will it take a little bit of the financial pressure off, a range of Kiwi households?
I don't like being all doom and gloom. So need to acknowledge that it is, it is some form of income going back to the pockets of New Zealanders. But at the same time, Andrew, you talked about vegetables. I mean, if we're looking at the annual, at what this will mean annually to a household, to an individual,
Yeah.
It's about like a 4% increase in income. Whereas if we're looking at the price of vegetables, for example, that's increased by 22% in the past year, that price. And so when we're measuring out what difference these tax reliefs will make in regards to the cost of living crisis that many New Zealanders are currently facing, and it unfortunately doesn't make much of a difference, and particularly for those who are on the lowest income households in New Zealand.
If you're renting, your rent's gone up. If you've got a mortgage, your interest rates have gone up. Insurance rates a lot of prices have gone up. Having that little bit of extra money, though, there's also a theory which says, well, this is good for some of the small and medium businesses in our society. I know local businesses, local shops and cafes, they're really doing it tough as well. Might this be a little bit of an economic boost to people struggling in that area, perhaps?
I mean, I think I'm not an economist, so I can't. I can't. Yeah, I might be not being accurate, but yeah, I think ultimately, I don't know whether those tax relief will make a tangible difference in whether people's spending habits to be able to support local business.
Yeah.
I don't think it's enough to be able to shift that or change that. If it does that's always a positive.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a positive to be able to invest back in local businesses and support the local economy. But just in regards to the cost of living of everything else, whether communities have the communities have the ability to be able to put that money back into the local economy, or whether that just goes into other things that are rising, like power, like food. Trying to stay optimistic. If it does translate into supporting the local economy, then yes, it translates on for average New Zealanders who are entitled to about $50 a fortnight, which
Mm-hmm.
which can buy a lot of items, but isn't necessarily enough to be able to make a significant difference.
Sorry to throw the economics question at you. I know that's not your specialist topic, but I mean, something which you do have experience, of course, is for the people that perhaps aren't getting the tax cuts or are proportionally getting much smaller cuts, the people that come to the Salvation Army and get support for food and housing assistance and all those sorts of things. For that part of our society, are these tax cuts going to affect them at all?
No. So a lot of those that we support won't necessarily benefit from these tax cuts. And if they do benefit from other policy changes, increasing payments towards ECE, there's like an admin, to get into nitty-gritty, there's like an admin that has to be done and to be able to receive those entitlements. And so that necessarily isn't in the reach of those that we support. So for a lot of the families that we support, we don't see that this is going to make a tangible difference for them when we're looking in regards to the challenges in regards to rental, the challenges in regards to accessing food and healthy food and enough food as well. And so unfortunately, the government is providing for the Middle New Zealand, which is what they campaigned on. But those that we support that are on the lowest incomes and those that are dependent on welfare, these policies don't necessarily make any difference for them.
I mean, you mentioned that there is some relief available, but there's all sorts of hoops that you need to jump through in order to claim that. You almost need to either be an accountant or be able to afford to have an accountant in order to claim it. And of course, the people who are eligible for it, they don't have access to those services. Is that something that that service agencies such as yourself, or I know there's other agencies involved in helping these people, is this a sort of a come alongside, help people get what they're entitled to that could be made available? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're really fortunate here. I'm in the Manukau Centre that we have WINS worker on site with us. And so when we get families that come through that don't necessarily know how to navigate the admin of government, they would come through and we would have our workers on site to be able to support them and go alongside them. There's heaps of barriers as to why a lot of the families that we support don't necessarily know how to navigate that. I mean, everything's moving towards technology and on apps, and you have to do it online. And we know from a lot of families that we support, they don't necessarily know how to navigate that space well enough. But a lot of government services are moving in that direction. And what that means is that they're leaving a lot of people behind ultimately, and we see a lot of those people walk through our front doors. And so it is a matter of just being able to walk alongside them and support them in what some of us would call, that's just basic, you should know these things. But the reality is that's not the reality for a lot of the families that we support. So being able to walk alongside them and support them in these different admin processes is really important. Like if they go to sign up for to ask for food grant, for example, right now the policy from WINS has changed, and so they need to provide all of these documents and tick all of these boxes in order to be able to get that type of support. And that's that's because these people are already at risk anyway. And so burdening them with all of this heavy paperwork just makes it even worse. So we try our best to be able to walk alongside them and other agencies in the communities as well.
Yeah, so bridging that digital divide in some cases so that they are able to access the support that they're entitled to. And of course, many of these families not having the financial literacy or having the actual finances to be able to get transport to where they need to go in order to jump through these hoops. Difficult times. And something else I wanted to talk about today, because there's been some changes in the child poverty targets. Now, this is something which all parties agreed to. Child poverty targets were seen as a great thing to be able to measure whether or not child poverty was being tackled by our society generally, not just one particular political flavour, but all different parts of Parliament. The National Party signed up for this when they were in opposition, but now making some tweaks and changes to how child poverty is measured.
Yeah, that was and they didn't even, make an announcement. They just kind of shifted the target without really telling anyone about it. I think from our perspective, that we advocate a lot around child poverty because, when we're seeing issues with children and young people, it's often a symptom of where the families are at. And
Yeah.
so when we're seeing, a significant number of our children living in child poverty, that's an indication of where we are as a society. And so ultimately what the government did is that they pushed the target for 2026, 2027 back. And so what that translates to is that they're willing to leave behind 8,000 kids in child poverty in order to be able to tick this box to say that they've met this target. And I know, when people are talking like targets and percentages, it's, it doesn't sound that bad, but when you actually translate it to actual faces, actual names, actual numbers of children, that what these target changes mean, it basically means that we're going to move the goalposts a little bit further. But what that means by moving a little bit further is that we're willing to leave 8,000 kids behind in material hardship just so that we could tick that box. I think another thing just to note is that when you take off the pressure by moving the target, it means you don't have, there's not that pressure to be able to provide the welfare support, to be able to lift housing standards for those that live in poverty, to be able to address food insecurity that a lot of these children in poverty are facing. So that's ultimately what that means for us when the government says that they're moving those targets.
I suppose that's the difference between having an economic approach to it and a self-confessed non-economist. Well, for both of us in that regard, you can go, oh, look, we've changed our targets. We're making some adjustments due to the financial circumstances. That's all very understandable, perhaps from an economic point of view. But you see not the numbers, but the people that are affected by this. You see the families whose children aren't getting the help and support that they would have got if those targets had remained in place, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the minister talked about, these are more achievable goals. But Andrew, we live in a country that makes like food for 40 million people. There's only 5 million of us, and yet we still have children going to school that are hungry. And so that raises the questions like we have the capacity within this country to be able to alleviate a lot of poverty that our tamariki live in. And yet we're not doing that. And by moving that target, we're just sort of, releasing some of the pressure that's on the minister to be able to change that. I think it's not just a government issue. I think it's a community issue as well, and all of society, that we need to take ownership that a country of our GDP, I think, with the level of child poverty that we have, we need to clearly to be able to alleviate the struggles that a lot of our children are facing.
And certainly just moving the target, in some ways it's like throwing a dart at the wall and then drawing a bullseye around it and say, see, look, we hit the target. But hey, if the target is movable, then it's not really a target. Anna, thank you so much for the work that you do with the Salvation Army and for your wisdom and insight. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.